Why? Why did you leave me when I needed you the most?" Her voice trembled in the freezing night as she clutched her swollen belly. Ethan Hale, the billionaire who never let anyone close, froze. 8 months. A secret pregnancy. A name he never gave. Now on her wrist. Someone lied. Someone stole his future. And the moment he saw her shivering at the bus stop, alone, everything he thought he controlled shattered. What he didn't know could destroy them. Or change everything. Watch until the end to uncover the shocking truth that no one expected. Welcome back to Beyond Color Stories. I'm so glad you're here. Tell me, where are you listening from today? Make sure you stay with me until the very end because this story is full of shocking twists, suspense and emotions you won't want to miss. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. All right, let's dive in. Ethan Hale had driven these streets 1,000 times, always with the same surgical precision, same speed, same posture, same steady rhythm of a man who built empires by controlling everything down to the smallest breath. But tonight the icy wind slashing across the city seemed to crawl under his skin in a way he couldn't explain, as if warning him that something ahead waited with claws ready to tear through the armor he'd spent years building, and that instinct made him slow the car just enough for the headlights to catch a figure at the empty midnight bus stop. At first, he dismissed it. He didn't make a habit of stopping for strangers, not at this hour, not in this part of town. But then the light passed over the trembling outline, soaking wet from the freezing rain, arms wrapped around herself like she was fighting death itself, and the shape of her face jolted him so violently he almost pressed the horn instead of the brakes. It was her, Lena, the woman he had cut out of his life with clean efficiency 8 months ago, the one mistake he thought he had erased, the one memory he believed he had buried so deep nothing could resurrect it. But there she was, trembling, soaked, breath fogging in the cold, looking like the city had spit her out and left her to break in silence. His fingers clenched the steering wheel so hard the leather creaked. He couldn't move at first. His mind rejected what his eyes confirmed, until another detail punched him harder than her presence itself. Her hand was pressed against the side of her swollen stomach, pregnant, very pregnant. His heartbeat slipped, then hammered in his ears with a force that felt almost painful. She looked like she was 8 months along. 8 months. Rory Hale, the titan of control, felt control rip away in a single breath. He shoved open the car door, the cold biting at him instantly, but the shock inside him burned hotter than the winter night. "Lena," he said, voice lower than he intended, rougher than he expected, like it scraped up from a place he hadn't touched in years. Her head jerked slightly, but she didn't turn fully, just enough for him to see the terror in her eyes. Terror specifically directed at him. That alone made something unpleasant twist deep in his chest. She whispered it like a cracked plea. "Please, don't come closer." Her voice was brittle, trembling, like speaking alone hurt her. He froze mid-step, the command slicing through him sharper than any business rival ever had. She looked like she was bracing for something, expecting him to be a threat rather than a lifeline, and the implications stung him with a confusion he didn't want to analyze. He scanned her from head to toe, shivering violently, hair plastered to her face, clothes clinging to her skin from the rain, shoes muddy like she had been walking helplessly for miles, and that stomach, so round it forced him to swallow hard because his brain kept calculating timelines he didn't want to calculate. He tried to speak again, but his voice caught, and he hated that. Nothing ever rattled him. Nothing except the woman looking at him like he was the last person she wanted to see on earth. He took another step despite her warning, because logic crashed into him. She was freezing, shaking, clearly on the brink of collapse. "What happened to you?" he asked, tone firmer now, instinctively slipping back into command, but she shrank away like his voice physically pushed her backward. He almost bit his tongue in frustration. She wasn't supposed to react to him like this. She wasn't supposed to be here at all. "I said don't come closer," she whispered again. But this time her voice cracked mid-sentence, and her hand instinctively shielded her stomach as if protecting the child from him. Another twist in his chest, another question he didn't want to voice. The rain intensified, cold needles stabbing both of them, but she didn't move. She looked like she didn't have the strength to. He opened his mouth to demand answers, demand anything, when something faint caught his attention, a tiny glint on her wrist. At first, it looked like a bracelet, but when she tried to hide her hand inside her sleeve, the movement was too awkward, too urgent. He stepped closer this time, ignoring her weak protest, because something about that small band triggered every instinct in him. "What's on your wrist?" She flinched. He reached out and grabbed her hand before she could pull away. Her skin was ice cold, her pulse was frantic. But none of that mattered compared to the sight that hit him when he turned her wrist slightly. A hospital band, fresh, still tight, and printed in bold black letters was a name that made his throat lock. Lena Hale, Hale, his surname. His vision flickered with shock so sharp it bordered on rage, not at her, but at the impossibility of it. She had never been Mrs. Hale. He had never married her. He had never permitted her to use his name. So how was she wearing it? "Why the hell are you wearing my name?" he demanded, cold fury punching through his confusion. She tried pulling her wrist back weakly, but he didn't let go. Not this time. Her voice faded, barely audible over the rain. "I didn't choose it." That answer made no sense. It felt like gasoline thrown on an already burning fuse. He stepped closer, searching her expression for any sign she was lying, manipulating, running some pathetic attempt to guilt him. Yet her eyes looked too broken, too tired, too defeated for deceit. But before he could press, before he could even ask the next question forming on his tongue, her knees buckled. For a second he thought she slipped, but then her head fell forward, body collapsing toward him, and instinct overrode every other emotion. He caught her before she hit the ground. Her breath was shallow, too shallow. Her skin was frighteningly cold. She wasn't just shivering, she was barely conscious. A pulse of panic, raw, primal, shot through him, something he had never felt even in billion-dollar crises. He wrapped his coat around her trembling body, his jaw clenched, his mind racing with brutal clarity. She needed help, immediately. But even as he lifted her into his arms, something else stung him. Her belly pressed against him, heavy, real, undeniable, and the timeline kept calculating itself in his head, whether he wanted it or not. He placed her gently in the passenger seat, buckled her in, brushing wet strands of hair from her face with a softness he didn't intend. His hands paused. Her lips had gone pale, too pale. He shoved the thought aside, slammed the door, and sprinted around to the driver's side, heart hammering with a strange cocktail of adrenaline and something else. Fear. No, not possible. He didn't fear things, he controlled them. Yet his hands trembled slightly as he gripped the steering wheel. As he sped toward the hospital, every red light, every turn, every passing second pushed more thoughts through his skull like bullets. Why was she out here alone? Why was she wearing his surname? Who put it on her? Was she in danger? Did she run from something? Or someone? And the darkest question he refused to let surface but couldn't fully suppress. Was the baby inside her the reason fate shoved her into his path again? Lena stirred beside him for a moment, whispering something he couldn't make out, but her voice held the same fear she had when she first saw him. Another small cliff of dread scraped at him. What had been done to her to make her fear him of all people? He parked violently, barely remembering to shut off the engine. When he lifted her out again, she clutched his shirt weakly, not out of trust, but instinct. That small grip gutted him more than he expected. As he carried her through the hospital doors, nurses rushed forward, but one froze briefly, recognizing him, a common reaction. Ethan Hale rarely appeared in public without headlines following, and him carrying a heavily pregnant woman at midnight? That alone would feed tabloids for weeks, but he didn't give a damn right now. They wheeled Lena toward the examination area while he followed like a shadow, refusing to let her disappear from his sight again. Then the nurse glanced at the hospital band on Lena's wrist and said casually, her husband already approved the prenatal file. Ethan felt the world tilt. Her husband? What husband? But he didn't speak. Not yet. He just stared at that band with his name, and felt something inside him sharpen with lethal precision. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't coincidence. Someone had used his identity. Someone had created this situation. Someone had tied his name to a woman carrying a child he hadn't known existed. Another micro cliffhanger slammed into him. What else had been done behind his back? As the nurse pushed Lena into a room and the doors swung shut between them, Ethan finally exhaled, but the breath came out harsh, cold, dangerous. Someone was playing a game with his name. Someone had turned his absence into a weapon, and someone had dragged Lena into hell to do it. He wasn't cold anymore, he was boiling. And beneath the anger, beneath the confusion, beneath the storm ripping through him, one question burned the loudest. Who the hell signed those papers pretending to be him? The nurse's words, her husband already approved the prenatal file, didn't just freeze Ethan. They detonated inside him like shrapnel. Husband. That single word hit him harder than the sight of her soaked clothes, or the swollen belly, or even the hospital band that stole his name without his consent. His name, his identity, his bloodline. Someone had stepped into his place, impersonated him, claimed authority over a woman he had walked away from because he thought he was making the clean choice back then. And now the universe was spitting that choice back in his face with venom. He stood there in the fluorescent-lit hallway, jaw clenched, breath sharp, shoulders tense, like he was seconds from snapping the metal railing beside him. Doctors and nurses moved around him, but he didn't hear any of them. The only thing echoing in his skull was that band, Lena Hale, and the nurse's easy, casual statement as if signing documents under his name was as normal as rain. Her husband. The phrase repeated like a cold blade, twisting deeper each second. Ethan didn't even realize he was gripping the edge of the counter until the wood groaned under his knuckles. He forced himself to inhale slowly, grounding himself because panic was unfamiliar territory. Fury, however, that he knew too well. And beneath the fury was something worse, something he refused to name, but felt burning like acid. The idea of another man stepping into his absence, claiming Lena, claiming the unborn child, claiming rights Ethan hadn't even known he possessed. A nurse approached him cautiously, as if recognizing the storm gathering behind his eyes. "Sir, she's being warmed and monitored. She's stable for now." For now. Another micro-threat, another spike hitting his spine. He nodded stiffly, not trusting himself to speak. The nurse continued, "Do you want to wait inside the consultation room? Her husband usually—" Ethan cut her off, voice cold enough to frost the air. "Stop calling him that." The nurse blinked, startled. "But the paperwork is fraudulent." His tone carried the weight of a verdict. The nurse backed off slightly, sensing she'd stepped into something bigger than a midnight emergency. Ethan didn't waste another second. He pushed past her and moved toward the frosted glass doors where Lena had disappeared minutes earlier, his pulse pounding like a war drum under his ribs. He needed answers. He needed truth. He needed Lena awake and talking, because she was the only link to this mess that smelled like calculated sabotage. And yet, under that cold logic, something more primitive churned. A territorial spark, unfamiliar but undeniable, ignited the moment he saw her wearing his name without ever having earned the right to it through him. He reached the observation window and saw her through the glass. A small, exhausted figure on the hospital bed, shivering under warmed blankets, eyes barely open. Her breathing was shallow, each rise of her chest sending a flicker of guilt slicing down his spine. Guilt he didn't want to feel, guilt he didn't give permission to exist, but it was there anyway. He pushed open the door and stepped in. The heat lamps painted her skin in soft gold, but nothing masked how fragile she looked. Too thin, too pale, too tense, even in unconsciousness. She wasn't resting. She was collapsing. The doctor checked her vitals, then turned toward him. Her temperature is dangerously low. She's dehydrated, malnourished, and her stress levels are off the charts. Ethan felt his jaw clench. What does she need? Rest, food, stability, and no more shocks tonight. Too late for that, Ethan thought bitterly. The doctor scribbled notes and added, "We'll monitor her contractions. Stress can trigger early labor." Another bullet straight to his chest. He hated how it affected him, but it did. Hard. The doctor left, closing the door quietly behind him, leaving Ethan alone with the woman he once thought he could detach from cleanly. He moved closer to her bed, studying every tremble of her fingers, every unsteady breath, every bruise-like shadow under her eyes. He didn't know who she had become in the month since their breakup, but the Lena he remembered, the independent woman who argued with him fearlessly, who laughed too loudly, who cried too quietly, would never willingly wear a man's name, especially not his, and never through deception. He reached out and gently brushed her wrist again, staring at the band. Lena Hale. The name felt wrong, not because she didn't deserve it, some ugly part of him whispered, but because she hadn't chosen it. Someone had forced it. Someone had rewritten her identity as if they owned the right to define her. His teeth grit so tightly it hurt. He needed answers, and she was too weak to run from him now. "Wake up," he muttered under his breath, not as an order but as something dangerously close to fear. Her eyes fluttered weakly. He leaned closer, catching the faintest sound of her breath. "Lena," he said quietly but firmly. Her lashes moved again. Her lips parted. He saw the moment recognition flickered in her eyes, the moment she realized he was standing over her again, ghost-like, the same man who broke her heart and walked away, but instead of anger, instead of relief, instead of longing, he saw dread. That stole the air from his lungs. She swallowed weakly, trying to sit up, and he automatically reached out to steady her before she could fall back. She tensed at his touch. He hated that even more than the fake husband claim. He forced his voice calm, but his insides were anything but. "You need to tell me who signed those papers." Her eyes drifted to the wristband with a hollow look. "I told you, I didn't choose it." "Someone did," he snapped, unable to soften the edge. "Someone put my name on you. Someone played a game with both of us." "Who?" She shook her head slowly, as if every movement hurt. "I don't know." He didn't believe that. Not yet. She might not know everything, but someone like her wouldn't walk blindly into signing documents she didn't understand. Except, she wasn't the Lena he remembered. This Lena looked beaten down, stripped of options, worn to the bone. Maybe desperation had forced her into situations she never imagined. He tried a different angle, leaning closer. "Lena, look at me." Her gaze lifted, barely. "Did you ever sign anything with my name on it?" She shook her head again, quicker this time, like the accusation offended her. "No." "Then someone forged it." She swallowed, her throat bobbing painfully. He caught it instantly. The fear wasn't of him, it was of something or someone else. He pressed harder. "Who told the hospital I was your husband?" Her eyes glistened with something sharp, shame. "I didn't ask," she whispered. "I just did what they told me because they said it would make things easier." They. A tiny word that cracked open 1,000 new suspicions. "Who are they?" he demanded. She began shaking her head again, but panic surged into her expression, replacing weakness with something more jagged, more haunted. Ethan leaned closer, voice low, dangerous. "Lena, Tell me who handled your documents." Her lips trembled. "Your assistant." The words were soft, but they hit him like a blow. A mini cliffhanger tightened the air. Ethan's expression turned deadly still. "Which one?" he asked, though deep down he already knew the answer. The one who always lingered too long in his office, the one who hovered around him like she had a claim she never earned, the one who had quietly smiled the day Lena walked out of his life. But he didn't voice her name yet. He wanted Lena to confirm it. He needed it from her mouth. Before she could, her body jerked slightly, a small shiver turning into a visible tremor. The monitors beeped faster. Ethan stepped forward instantly. "Lena!" She winced as another cold wave forced through her spine. "It's nothing," she whispered. But he wasn't stupid. Nothing in this situation was nothing. He walked around the bed, grabbed another blanket, and draped it over her, adjusting the heat lamp closer, his movements sharp but careful. She watched him silently, confusion flickering behind her fatigue, as if she didn't recognize this version of him, as if he was the one behaving strangely. And maybe he was. Because he wasn't just angry. He wasn't just suspicious. Something else was creeping in, something heavier. He pushed it back ruthlessly. Now wasn't the time. "You said someone told you to use my name," he said, forcing his focus locked. "Who gave you that band?" She hesitated. Too long. He leaned in. "Lena." Another tremble went through her body. She grimaced, curling slightly around her stomach. Instantly, every alarm in his brain went off. "Are you in pain?" "Just cold," she breathed. But the lie was obvious. His hands curled at his sides. He didn't have the luxury of panicking. He needed control, answers, truth. "We're not done," he said quietly, firmly. "Who signed the files?" Her eyes slid closed, her throat working like she was swallowing something bitter. "I don't know their name," she whispered. "I just remember a voice on the phone telling the nurse, 'Mr. Hale approved everything.'" A phone call, not in person. Someone had used his identity from a distance because they knew Ethan would never show up to verify. Another cliffhanger slammed into his chest. Who had the guts and access to pretend to be him? Ethan didn't realize he was pacing until he stopped at the corner of the room, chest heaving with anger he couldn't contain. Someone inside his own world had manipulated this entire situation. Someone with access to his private files, his schedule, his absence. Someone who wanted Lena out of his life permanently. He turned back toward her slowly, like a man assembling a puzzle whose pieces were all cut from betrayal. "Lena," he said, voice low. "Did someone from my company contact you after we broke up?" Her breath caught. Her eyes flicked away. There. Another micro cliffhanger tightening the air. She was hiding something, not out of deceit, out of fear. "Lena," he repeated, stepping closer. "What did they say to you?" She stared at the blankets, jaw trembling. "Not tonight, Ethan," she whispered. "Please." He didn't like the plea. He didn't like the shake in her voice. He didn't like how exhausted she was, how fragile she looked, how close she seemed to crumbling under truths she'd been carrying alone. But he also didn't like the truth she was avoiding. Still, he forced himself to stop pressing for the moment, because pushing harder while she was barely conscious was a waste. He needed her awake, fed, stable, breathing normally. He needed her strong enough to spill everything. He exhaled slowly, fighting the urge to interrogate her until dawn. "Fine. We'll talk after the doctors clear you." Her eyes closed, relief flickering across her weak expression. Not relief at his presence, relief that he stopped asking. He stepped away from the bed, trying to calm the storm roaring through him. But calm was impossible now, because the truth was becoming clearer with every fragmented detail. Lena whispered, "This wasn't an accident. This was sabotage, and whoever orchestrated it had effectively played God with both their lives. Ethan glanced at the wristband again, the bold letters burning into his mind like a brand. Lena Hale. Someone used his name. Someone used his authority. Someone tried to rewrite Lena's life through him without his consent. And the final cliffhanger of the chapter settled into his bones, with the weight of vengeance sharpening inside him. Who the hell dared to sign those papers pretending to be him, and what else had they done behind his back? Ethan stood at the foot of her bed, every muscle pulled tight, every instinct coiled after the hellish revelations of the night. He had learned enough to be angry, but not enough to understand the entire betrayal, and that half-knowledge burned through him like gasoline waiting for a spark. Lena lay against the raised hospital mattress, weak but conscious now, her hair messy and damp from the earlier storm, her lips pale from exhaustion, her eyes avoiding his with the kind of deliberate effort that only comes from old wounds reopening all at once. The moment her gaze drifted toward him, she flinched, not from fear of him, but from fear of everything tied to him, everything that had ruined her quiet world after their breakup. That reaction alone sliced him open more deeply than he expected. She didn't look angry. She looked defeated. And that wasn't the Lena he remembered. She had once challenged him, contradicted him, laughed at him, softened him, confused him. Now she looked like someone who had been fighting far too long without backup. "Lena," he said, voice low, steady, dangerously close to cracking. "We're not leaving things half-spoken anymore. Start from the beginning. All of it." She closed her eyes for a long moment, as if gathering the strength to resurrect memories she'd buried for survival rather than closure. When she finally opened them, there was resignation there. Resignation that tonight, truth wasn't optional anymore. "You want the beginning?" she whispered. "Fine." Mini cliffhanger. Her voice trembled, not from weakness but from something brittle inside her breaking free. "It started the week after we ended," she said, refusing to meet his gaze. "I found out I was pregnant. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to tell. I didn't know what you'd say, but I decided you deserved to know, even if we weren't together anymore." He felt his jaw tense. "And you tried to reach me." She nodded. "I called your company, your office, your number, everything. I left messages, I sent emails, I tried for days." Her breathing grew heavier, as if each memory weighed down her chest. "Finally, your assistant called back." Another mini cliffhanger. Ethan's eyes narrowed instantly. "She told me," Lena swallowed, clutching the sheets, "that you didn't want anything from me or the baby." His pulse dropped into a cold, controlled silence. "What exactly did she say?" His voice was ice. Lena's breath shook. "She said you told her. Block every call. Block every message. I don't want her, and I don't want her child." Ethan's heart didn't break. It detonated. He inhaled through his teeth, forcing control over the explosion inside him. "I never said that," he growled. "Not once. Not even for a second." She let out a hollow laugh, the kind that wasn't amusement, but surrender. "You think I didn't want to believe that? You think I didn't hope you'd call? You think I didn't pray every day that the man I knew wasn't the monster I was told you'd become?" Her voice cracked. "But silence is an answer too, Ethan." He stepped closer, anger radiating from him in waves, not at her but at the invisible hands that had puppeteered their lives. "You should have come to me." "I tried," she snapped, a flash of the old Lena breaking through. "But every time I got near your building, security turned me away. They had my name flagged. They said you left instructions. I was humiliated in front of strangers. I was pregnant and alone. I had no one." Another tremble hit her voice. "And every attempt I made to contact you ended with that same assistant intercepting it, mocking me, telling me to stop trying to tie myself to you." A mini cliffhanger. Ethan's eyes darkened, lethal. "What else did she do?" he asked. Lena hesitated, then looked away. "She said using your surname would avoid complications with medical care and insurance, that it would make the pregnancy department handle my case quicker since I didn't have support. She made it sound practical, like she was doing me a favor. Her fingers tightened. I was scared. I didn't know how to handle prenatal appointments alone, so I followed what she said. I didn't realize she had given permission under your name. I didn't realize she used your identity. Ethan leaned in, voice sharp. Why the hell didn't you question why she cared? Lena glared weakly. Because at that time I thought she was your voice, and if she spoke that confidently, I believed she was speaking for you. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, fury vibrating through him. That assistant, he'd trusted her with scheduling, with managing his calendar, with screening calls. He never imagined she'd weaponize that trust against Lena. And you never tried again after that, he pushed. Though he already saw the answer forming on her face, she let out a slow, painful exhale. Every attempt was blocked. Every message went unanswered. Every time I tried to walk into your building, they made me feel like trash. Another tear slipped out. She wiped it with a trembling hand. I had no idea if you hated me or if you just didn't care, but the silence felt like an answer, so I stopped trying. Ethan clenched his jaw until it hurt. And you went through pregnancy alone because you thought I rejected you, he said, his voice quieter, darker. She didn't answer at first. Then she nodded. That single nod cracked something deep inside him, something hardened by childhood trauma, something shaped by loss, something he always buried under money and control. The idea that she had carried his child alone, scared, abandoned, lied to, was a blade twisting through his ribs. And you didn't ask anyone for help? He demanded, breath tight. Not friends? Not family? Her laugh was small and bitter. You know I don't have family, and after everything, going to your world felt pointless. I didn't want to beg. Her eyes met his for the first time fully. And you made it very easy to believe you were done with me. Another mini cliffhanger? Ethan's expression flickered between guilt, rage, and something raw that he wasn't ready to name. I didn't walk away because I didn't want you, he said quietly. I walked away because I thought giving you freedom was the cleanest cut. I didn't want to drag you into my chaos. She stared at him, disbelief etched into every fragile feature. Well, congratulations. Your clean cut nearly destroyed me. He inhaled sharply, feeling the weight of every consequence he never anticipated. So, she continued, bitterness bleeding in, when your assistant told me you wanted nothing to do with the child, I believed her. Why wouldn't I? You left without asking why, without saying anything, without looking back. He didn't defend himself. He couldn't. The truth was, she wasn't wrong. But the worst part, she whispered, voice softening into something wounded. She said, if I used your surname for the medical files, I'd get faster help. And after being turned away from clinics for not having insurance, after fainting from dehydration one morning, after losing my job because of too many sick days, her voice cracked again. I did what I had to do. I agreed. Ethan's hands curled into fists. That's why you were wearing my name, he said slowly. Yes, she whispered. Not because I wanted it, because I had no choice. Mini cliffhanger, Ethan's expression shifted, darker, more dangerous. And you never questioned why she cared so much about keeping us apart, he asked. Lena looked down. I thought she was just being loyal to you. I didn't know she... Her voice trailed off. That she what? Ethan pressed. That she hated me, Lena whispered. Every time I called, her voice had this satisfaction, like she wanted me gone, like she enjoyed telling me you didn't care. Ethan felt something in his chest rupture at the image of Lena, pregnant and alone, begging for help, while someone at his side slammed every door shut. She made sure you never reached me, he said, voice low. She made sure I thought you were done with us. And she made sure I thought you were done with me. Lena gave a small, broken sigh. She got exactly what she wanted. Ethan stepped closer to her bed, his shadow falling over her. She stiffened, not out of fear, but out of the reflex of someone who doesn't know what truths will cost next. "And the baby?" he asked slowly. She tensed instantly. Mini cliffhanger. Her breath hitched. He held her gaze, unblinking, voice dropping to a raw, unforgiving whisper. "Lena, is this baby even mine?" The air between them froze, heavier than the storm outside, heavier than every lie, heavier than the months that tore them apart. And she inhaled like the question had stabbed straight through her. Ethan stood frozen in the sterile hospital room, the weight of her words anchoring him to the spot, as if gravity had doubled, as if every moment of their past, every miscommunication, every silent month apart had conspired to hit him all at once, and the sound of her voice saying, "Ethan, you're the only man I've ever been with," reverberated through him like a hammer striking metal, sharp and irreducible, cutting through layers of self-imposed armor, and he could feel the truth of it embedding itself in his chest, sinking into the very marrow of his bones, cracking him open in places he didn't know existed, making his carefully constructed world of spreadsheets, deals and numbers collapse into a mess of raw human emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the faint trembling of her hands clutching the thin hospital blanket, the way her body sagged against the sheets as if the world had finally stopped holding her upright, and he realized that in her tired, weary gaze there was no pretense, no manipulation, no lingering resentment beyond survival and hurt, and that realization alone ignited something dangerous in him, something beyond guilt, beyond regret. Something that demanded action, demanded acknowledgement, demanded reparation. And yet, even as he took a step closer, his mind racing, his chest tightening, he noticed the faint curve of her lips, the bitter, humorless laugh she let slip when she said, "You're 8 months late." And it struck him with the force of an unexpected blow, the cruel irony slicing through the tension in his veins, turning the heat of rage into molten obsession, making his jaw clench with a strength born of desperation, his fingers curling into fists that threatened to crush the delicate porcelain of the moment. And he realized that this wasn't guilt anymore, not in the conventional sense. It was an obsession that had planted itself firmly in the spaces between his thoughts, infecting every rational calculation with the singular focus that she had suffered alone, that someone had stolen months of their lives, that he had been denied the chance to protect her, to stand by her, to be what he was meant to be. And as he looked down at her, faint traces of exhaustion etched into the line of her jaw, the slight quiver in her eyelashes, the tiny, desperate exhale she gave as if to remind him of her fragility. He knew he couldn't allow another second of distance between them. Not tonight, not ever. And he leaned closer, forcing her gaze to meet his, holding her eyes with an intensity that made the air between them thicken. And he whispered, voice rough, "I will find who did this, Lena. Whoever tried to hurt you, whoever kept us apart, I will find them." And she let out a shaky breath, her fingers tightening briefly on the blanket, and he could see in her eyes both relief and lingering skepticism, the kind only someone who has been deceived repeatedly could carry, and that contradiction, that duality of hope and fear, made him ache with an urgency that was physical, visceral, impossible to ignore, a storm inside him that demanded movement, resolution, justice. He paced a single step, then another, not leaving her side but circling mentally, reviewing every memory, every encounter, every moment the assistant had interacted with them. Every day she had claimed to be a loyal conduit for his wishes, and he could almost see the assistant's smirk, the calculated satisfaction in each lie, each intercepted message, each cold denial, and Ethan's knuckles whitened as he gritted his teeth, the fury bubbling under his skin like molten iron threatening to explode. And Lena watched him quietly, too drained to speak, too exhausted to argue, and the tension between them was punctuated by the occasional beep from the monitors, each one a reminder that life and death, truth and deception were playing out simultaneously in the room, and then Ethan's phone vibrated sharply in his pocket, the sudden intrusion breaking through the haze of anger and obsession, and when he glanced at the screen, he saw the name of his investigator flashing insistently, a familiar professional calm in the contact that contrasted sharply with the chaos roiling inside him. And he swiped the phone open, reading the short, urgent message that made his pulse spike in a way that was equal parts anticipation and dread. "Sir, you need to see this. It's about the assistant who blocked her." And the weight of those words hit him like a freight train, the realization dawning that this was bigger than he thought, that the betrayal had layers he hadn't fully imagined, that the months of silence, of manipulation, of stolen contact were not random but orchestrated, and the depth of the treachery made his stomach churn with a cold, precise fury. He looked back at Lena, whose gaze had sharpened ever so slightly, curiosity and fear mixing in a way that mirrored his own, and he saw in her subtle tremor, in the slight furrow of her brow, the unspoken questions, the need for answers, the silent plea for justice, and it made his obsession crystallize further, a single dangerous clarity. The assistant had crossed a line, and she would pay. But before that, he had to secure Lena, ensure she was safe, ensure their child was protected, and in that instant he realized that he would not leave her, not for a second, not for a heartbeat, that he would fight through every obstacle, every betrayal, every lie, every hour lost, and he would reclaim the time stolen from them. And as he stood there holding the phone tight in one hand, the other hovering near her for instinctive reassurance, he saw the faintest quiver of a smile break through Lena's exhaustion. A subtle acknowledgement that he was here, that he hadn't abandoned her. And in that fragile moment, the room seemed to shrink around them, the world outside irrelevant, as if every second had slowed to let them absorb the weight of their reunion, the gravity of their losses, the potency of their unresolved past. And yet, even as he processed it, even as he felt the shift in the air, even as he prepared to act, another small mini-cliffhanger struck him, a subtle, almost imperceptible hesitation in her breath, a flicker of uncertainty that reminded him that trust, once broken, is never fully restored in an instant, that the path ahead would be fraught with confrontation, revelation, and the unraveling of every carefully constructed lie. And he leaned closer, whispering again, softer now, but no less intense, "Stay with me, Lena. I won't let anything happen to you. Not now, not ever." And she nodded faintly, her exhaustion giving way to a fragile hope, her eyes glistening, the barest hint of tears threatening to spill. And he felt that twist inside him, the one that made him ache with the need to act, to uncover every secret, to punish every betrayer. And as he looked at the phone again, knowing the investigator had more than just confirmation of wrongdoing, he felt the first seeds of vengeance and protection intertwine, setting the stage for a reckoning that would consume them both, and the cliffhanger lingered like a shadow over the room. He would see exactly what the assistant had done, and the revelations promised to shift everything they thought they knew about the past 8 months. 5. Ethan stormed into his office, the storm of emotions from the hospital still thrumming through him like electricity in his veins, his suit slightly damp from the rain outside, the city lights bleeding through the tall glass windows and casting long shadows across the polished marble floor. His fists clenched so tightly that his nails bit into his palms, and yet nothing could prepare him for the weight of the folder his investigator slid across the gleaming desk, the crisp sound of paper cutting through the heavy silence of the office, and the moment his eyes landed on the contents, a cold fury unlike anything he had felt before coiled in his chest, tightening around his ribs like steel bands. The assistant, his trusted assistant, the woman he had relied on to manage every detail of his life, every call, every schedule, every interaction, had been secretly in love with him for years. And in that obsession, she had deliberately, meticulously, maliciously blocked every message, every call, every attempt Lena had made to reach him, manipulating their lives, controlling their access to one another, deciding who could touch his world and who would be cast into isolation. And worse, she had forged his signature on the pregnancy documents, effectively claiming authority over decisions she had no right to, using his name to erase his ability to intervene, to protect, to act. And as Ethan's eyes scanned the details, the dates, the emails, the intercepted messages meticulously logged, every fiber of his being screamed in betrayal, in rage, in disbelief that someone so close could weaponize love and loyalty into a prison of lies, and he felt the world narrowing down to the small, precise lines of paper, each one a dagger in the story of the months he had lost, each one a brutal reminder that the child he had been denied, the woman he had been cut off from, had suffered in his absence, and he could feel his chest heaving with a fury so hot it seemed to scorch the air around him. He slammed the folder onto the desk, making the glass tremble, the sound echoing in the cavernous office. And yet he could not focus solely on the betrayal, because in the back of his mind a single persistent thought gnawed at him, relentless and cold. Lena, alone, vulnerable, vanished from the hospital, leaving only a small, cryptic note behind, scribbled in her familiar handwriting. "Don't look for me," and his stomach twisted, the simplicity of the words hiding the storm of meaning behind them, the subtext, the silent screams, the fear, the exhaustion, and the possible danger she had faced. And as he turned over the note in his hands, running his fingers over the familiar penmanship, his mind raced through every scenario, every possible explanation, every hint she might have left about her location, the people she might have trusted, the roads she might have taken, and he realized with a sickening, heart-stopping clarity that this wasn't just a goodbye. It was a warning, a desperate attempt to keep him away while she navigated the most dangerous, vulnerable hours of her life, and the knowledge hit him harder than any betrayal. Lena had written that note while in early labor, carrying their child into the world under duress, under fear, under isolation, and every moment of her suffering, every contraction, every anxious heartbeat, every tear shed alone now seared into his mind, igniting a rage so pure it became almost blinding, almost uncontrollable, and he could feel his hands trembling, the familiar control he prided himself on slipping, because this was no longer about business, no longer about measured vengeance. It was about raw, personal justice, about reclaiming the life and the woman that had been stolen from him, about confronting the assistant who had manipulated their fate with the arrogance of unrequited obsession. And yet, even as he prepared for confrontation, even as he traced every angle of strategy in his mind, he felt a flicker of worry for Lena, a fragile human concern piercing through the cold fury, imagining her alone, exhausted, terrified, and that concern twisted into obsession, making his need to find her immediate, urgent, physical, and all-consuming drive that left no space for hesitation, no room for error. And as he paced the office, the cityscape behind him a blur of nightlights and rain-slick streets, his mind raced over every possible shelter, every friend she might have called upon, every safe place she could have imagined, and with every passing second, the cliffhanger loomed larger, the invisible clock of her labor ticking, every second making the stakes higher, the urgency more palpable, and the fury more lethal. And he realized that when he found her, he would not simply demand answers, he would demand accountability, protection, vengeance, and reunion, all in one, because the world had dared to cheat him of the right to be there for the woman and child he loved, and he would not allow that theft to go unpunished. And even as the storm of his emotions raged, even as the investigators' reports lay open before him detailing every lie, every interception, every forged signature, he felt a twisted exhilaration, a clarity in the chaos, a singular purpose that no amount of corporate pressure or societal expectation could dilute. And he knew the next hours would be a reckoning, a confrontation, a rescue, and in the back of his mind, the cruelest mini-cliffhanger of all lingered, a shadow at the edge of his awareness. Every decision he made, every step he took, would need to reach her in time, to protect her from herself, from others, from the assistant's manipulations, and to ensure that the life she was bringing into the world was not endangered by the silence, the lies, and the months of deceit that had already cost them so much. And as he held the note again, feeling the weight of her handwriting like a pulse of reality, he realized that the coming hours would decide everything, and that every second she had spent alone in pain, in fear, was now a blade pointing directly at him, daring him to fail, challenging him to act, demanding he rise beyond the fury, beyond the betrayal, beyond the obsession, into something sharper, more dangerous, and more unstoppable than he had ever been before. Ethan tore through the rain-slick streets of the city, the tires of his car slicing through puddles with a ferocity that matched the storm roaring inside him. Every passing streetlight a blur as he scanned for any sign of Lena, any shadow that might indicate where she had fled. The memory of her note, "Don't look for me," burning in his mind like acid, and every second that ticked by increased the urgency in his chest, the gnawing awareness that she was not just alone, not just frightened, but in labor, bringing into the world the child he had been denied for 8 months. And that thought alone made his hands tighten on the steering wheel, veins bulging, knuckles white, as he calculated every possible safe haven, every abandoned building, every shelter where she might have sought refuge, and the rain plastered his hair to his forehead, ran down the collar of his shirt, stung his eyes, but he barely noticed, because nothing existed except the desperate need to find her before it was too late, before the cruel hands of fate inflicted any further harm, before the life she carried was endangered. And as he turned another corner, his mind raced through every scenario, every possible path she could have taken, every instinct he had ever relied upon in business, in combat, in crisis, now repurposed for a singular mission of protection and redemption. And then, in a narrow alley beneath the flickering orange glow of a failing street lamp, he saw her. The familiar silhouette huddled against the far wall of an abandoned community center, drenched, shaking, hair plastered to her face, body curled protectively over her swollen belly. And for a moment he could not breathe, his chest tightening, heart hammering like a war drum, because she looked so small, so fragile, so impossibly alone, and yet unmistakably, painfully, undeniably his, the weight of the months lost crashing over him in a wave of guilt and rage, and he slammed the brakes, the tires screeching against the wet asphalt, adrenaline igniting his senses to a hyper-focused edge, and he threw open the car door, ignoring the rain that drenched him instantly, the cold that cut to the bone, the wind that whipped against his skin, because nothing mattered but reaching her now. And as he ran, he called her name, voice hoarse, loud, shaking with desperation, each syllable a plea, a command, a prayer, and she lifted her head, eyes wide, mouth trembling, the sight of him both terrifying and comforting, and he saw the tears streaking her rain-soaked cheeks, the sweat from labor mixing with the storm, the sharp, sudden shudder that traveled through her body as a contraction seized her, and something inside him snapped, the final restraint of measured control cracking like glass under pressure, and he fell to his knees beside her, cupping her face, pressing his hands to her shoulders, desperate to anchor her, to make her understand that he was here, that he would not leave her, that he would not allow the world to steal another second from them. And she looked up at him through wet, exhausted eyes, whispered hoarsely, "Why now, Ethan?" And the raw ache in his chest twisted into something fiercer, sharper, a desperate, relentless need that had nothing to do with control, with money, with pride, but everything to do with survival, with protection, with love forged in absence and betrayal. And he leaned closer, voice cracking yet unwavering, "Because losing you once ruined me, losing you twice will destroy me." And she exhaled shakily, a mixture of relief and disbelief, gripping his arm as another contraction hit. and he felt her body tense, felt the panic rising in her, felt the helplessness of the situation pressed down like lead. And he pulled her into a protective embrace, shielding her from the rain, from the cold, from the invisible threats that haunted his mind, from the months of lies and interference that had kept them apart. And yet even as he held her, the reality of her labor forced itself into the room, inescapable, relentless. And he realized with sudden, horrifying clarity that this was not going to be simple, that she was not going to deliver easily, that the child she carried might be in danger if he did not act with precision, urgency, and unwavering focus. And his hands trembled slightly as he guided her toward the community center, into a dry corner, into what little shelter the abandoned building could offer, his mind racing, calculating every movement, every possible complication. And she cried softly, a whimper between contractions, each one more intense than the last, and he felt a clawing panic rise, imagining the worst-case scenario, envisioning every medical emergency, every outcome where he had failed, and he shook his head, forcing himself to focus, to calm the chaos in his chest, to become a conduit for strength, for protection, for action. And he knelt beside her, holding her hands, rubbing her back, murmuring every word he could think of to soothe her, to anchor her, to make her believe that the world had not abandoned her, that he had not abandoned her, that she could trust him with her life, with the life of their child, with the very essence of their shared destiny. And she looked at him, eyes wide, lips trembling, breath ragged, and whispered again, "Ethan, it hurts." And he nodded, tight-lipped, jaw clenched, feeling each spasm of pain through her, imagining it as a personal attack, a challenge he could not let defeat her. And he pressed closer, hands firm on her hips, shoulders back, anchoring her as best he could in the small space, as lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the room in brief flashes of white, shadows dancing across the walls, reflecting the chaos outside mirrored in their confined, desperate microcosm. And every thrum of her heartbeat, every gasp, every strained exhale was a reminder that time was merciless, that help was minutes away but maybe not soon enough. And he felt the icy spike of fear twist through him, not just for Lena, but for the child, imagining every complication, every emergency procedure, every worst-case outcome. And then another contraction hit, more violent than before, and she screamed sharply, the sound cutting through the storm outside, through the pounding rain, through the tension in his chest, and he felt it like a physical blow, adrenaline spiking, vision sharpening, body coiling with urgency. And he realized, gut twisting, that something was wrong, that this was not a normal delivery, that time, skill, and intervention would all be critical in the coming moments, and that scream, the raw, primal cry, was the first sign of the danger to come, the cliffhanger that sliced through the night, that suspended everything in suspense, leaving nothing between them and disaster but Ethan's determination, his instincts, and the fragile thread of hope that he could still bring them through alive, intact, together. And as he clutched her trembling hands, whispering urgent encouragements, willing her to breathe, to fight, to trust him, every fiber of his being screamed at him to move faster, think sharper, act harder. Because if he failed, if the world, if the assistance lies, if the cruel twist of fate had one more turn left, it could claim them both before the hospital doors could offer salvation. And in that instant, the storm outside, the darkness of the abandoned building, the rain, the cold, all of it became irrelevant except for the single, piercing, terrifying awareness that Lena's scream had just announced the first true danger, that the baby was not coming normally, and that everything they had survived up until now was about to be tested in ways neither of them could have anticipated. Ethan's hands trembled only slightly, but the tremor was enough to betray the storm inside him as he hoisted Lena into his arms, feeling the curve of her body, the weight of her swollen belly, the shivers from exhaustion and labor coursing through her like electricity. And he ran to the car with a speed and ferocity that bordered on reckless, ignoring the rain slashing at his face, the water soaking his suit, the thunder rolling overhead, all sensory inputs reduced to insignificance compared to the urgency of keeping her safe. And as he strapped her into the passenger seat, carefully, yet with a tension born of panic, he felt her fingers clutch his wrist, nails digging in, weak but desperate, her eyes wide with fear and relief. And he caught her gaze, whispering, "I've got you. I'm not letting go. Not now. Not ever." And the words barely left his mouth before he slammed the car into gear, tires screeching on wet asphalt, and the city outside became a blur of neon lights reflected in puddles, rain streaking down the windshield in jagged rivulets, windshield wipers barely keeping pace as Ethan drove like a man possessed, heart hammering, chest tight, mind racing through every emergency scenario, every possible complication, every shortcut to the hospital, calculating each turn, each stoplight, each possible obstacle, and the thought that she might lose control, might lose the baby, might lose her life, shredded through him, made him grit his teeth until his jaw ached, the adrenaline blinding, the fear coiling into pure, single-minded determination. And as he reached the hospital, barely slowing to brake, he leapt from the car, swinging the door open to lift her out again, ignoring the cold rain, the looks of passing pedestrians, the beeping of car alarms, the distant sirens that now seemed almost silent compared to the storm inside him. And he ran, arms tight around her, to the emergency entrance where nurses and doctors, alerted by the chaos and the call he had made in a frantic flurry during the drive, met them immediately, taking Lena into their arms with practiced efficiency. And he followed, frantic, pacing behind them, answering every question, repeating her name, her condition, her complaints, as she cried out again, each scream stabbing through him like a blade, the sound of contractions, of pain, of fear, echoing in the sterile hallway, bouncing off the walls. And he realized with a sudden, terrifying clarity that he had never truly understood helplessness until this moment, that all the boardrooms, all the deals, all the power he wielded meant nothing here. And he clenched his fists, teeth gritted, eyes scanning every monitor, every instrument, every indicator as they rushed her into the emergency delivery room, and he followed close behind, breath ragged, pulse hammering, realizing that this was no longer a game, no longer a business decision, no longer a scenario where timing could be negotiated, but life and death, immediate, raw, unforgiving, and he felt the cold touch of the surgical staff as they prepared her. The smell of antiseptic and fear filling the room, the rhythmic beeping of monitors setting a tense tempo that matched the frantic pace of his heart, and he knelt beside her, holding her hand, gripping it so tightly that it seemed to anchor both of them in a reality that was otherwise spinning out of control, murmuring her name, counting her breaths, keeping her grounded as she moaned, each contraction bringing a new wave of panic, a new surge of terror that he could feel pulse through him as though he shared the pain physically. And then the baby emerged, a tiny, fragile life crying weakly, the sound ripping through him in shock and awe, making him realize that he was trembling, shaking in ways he had never allowed himself to feel, that the cold control, the precision, the detachment he had prided himself on, melted instantly into raw human emotion, unfiltered, unrelenting, and as he watched the child, every thought of betrayal, of lies, of sabotage, every hour lost, every tear she had shed alone, every fear she had endured without him, surged in a tidal wave, almost knocking him off balance, and yet before he could process the moment fully, the doctor's face turned grave, eyes hard, voice cutting through the fog of emotion. "The baby is stable, but the mother needs immediate surgery. Sign here." And Ethan, breath-catching, heart-hammering, didn't hesitate, snatching the clipboard, pen in hand, signing as her partner, her protector, her everything, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like armor, and the fear that he could fail twisting in his gut, raw and metallic, and even as the nurses moved Lena away, prepped her for the OR, cleaned her, strapped her to the surgical bed, and hooked her up to monitors. He followed relentlessly, refusing to leave, eyes scanning every screen, every line, every beep, every pulse, every movement, noticing every twitch, every reaction, every subtle flicker of alarm that might indicate complication, and he realized in a chilling instant that nothing would matter except keeping her alive, keeping their child safe. And as he watched the anesthesia mask lower over her face, saw the slight panic in her eyes, heard the small frightened whimpers, felt her hand squeeze his one last time, he promised himself silently, fiercely, that he would not fail, that he would protect both of them no matter what. And then, as the surgery began, monitors beeping rhythmically, the team moving with urgent precision, he noticed a sudden, sharp dip in her heart rate, the line on the screen plunging, and the world seemed to freeze for a heartbeat, every sense sharpened to brutal focus, adrenaline spiking, body coiled for action, mind racing through every emergency protocol, and a new wave of terror washed over him, primal and raw, as the cliffhanger of life and death screamed in the sterile air. Lena's heart rate was crashing, dangerously, catastrophically, and every second counted, every breath, every movement, every decision could determine the outcome for the two most important people in his life, leaving Ethan standing on the precipice of helplessness, rage, and obsessive determination, knowing that the next moments would define everything, that the power he wielded in the boardroom meant nothing here, and that he had finally, irrevocably, become human. The monitors beeped steadily, the sterile hum of the hospital room pressing against Ethan like a suffocating reminder of everything that had just passed, and when Lena finally stirred, blinking through the fog of anesthesia and pain, the first thing she saw was him, bent over her, eyes red-rimmed, hair mussed, face lined with exhaustion, and something far deeper, relentless love, panic, and an intensity that made her chest tighten even in her weakened state. And then her gaze shifted downward, and there, cradled in his arms, swaddled in the soft hospital blanket, was their daughter, small and perfect, eyes closed, tiny chest rising and falling with the fragile rhythm of life, and Lena's throat tightened, tears welling before she could stop them, and her fingers twitched toward the blanket as if to touch this miracle. But Ethan's hands were firm around it, protective, unyielding, and when their eyes met, he whispered, voice hoarse, "She's ours. She made it. You made it." Her heart swelled and broke at the same time, shock and relief fighting in her chest, and she tried to speak, to form words, but the raw exhaustion and pain choked them back, so she merely nodded, tiny movements conveying everything she couldn't say. And Ethan's gaze softened, but only briefly, because beneath the relief, beneath the awe, there was still fire, there was still rage at what had been stolen from them, at the months of lies and absence, at the manipulations that had nearly destroyed both her and their child. And he leaned back slightly, brushing damp strands of hair from her face, and in the pause, the weight of silence pressed down, thick, uncomfortable, heavy with confessions unspoken, and Lena, mustering the courage through trembling lips, whispered, "Ethan, But the words faltered, and she closed her eyes, shame and fear mingling, because there was a secret she had carried even before the breakup, a truth that had gnawed at her nights, that had forced her into silence, that had kept her from reaching him sooner, that had kept her from telling him everything when she should have trusted him to protect her, and the words tumbled out in a rush, slow at first, then spilling like a dam breaking. "I didn't tell you. Not when I found out I was pregnant. I was afraid. Afraid you'd reject me, afraid you'd never want a family, afraid you'd see it as a burden, and I couldn't lose you again, so I stayed silent." Ethan's eyes widened, the intensity in his gaze sharpening, flickers of hurt and disbelief crossing the storm of love and rage in his chest, and he reached out, fingers brushing her cheek lightly, almost gently, though every inch of him screamed with the weight of what she'd endured alone, and she met his gaze, voice shaking but defiant in its vulnerability. I thought you'd hate me. I thought you'd leave. I couldn't risk losing you, not again. So I hid it. I hid everything." Ethan exhaled slowly, jaw tight, throat raw, as if swallowing down years of unacknowledged pain, memories of loneliness, fear and helplessness he had buried under control and precision. And then, voice low, almost a growl, he admitted the wound she had never known existed, the scar he had carried silently through the years. Lena, my coldness. It wasn't always for show. Losing my mother during childbirth. I've carried it with me my whole life, terrified that if I allowed myself to care, to love, to hope, I would repeat the tragedy, that I'd lose someone I loved in the same way, and I buried it, and I buried you along with it, thinking distance and control could protect me, could protect us. But it couldn't. She shivered under the weight of his words, chest tightening, as the truth of his fear met the truth of her own, a mirror of pain and longing reflected between them. And for a long moment, neither spoke. The room filled only with the soft whimpers of their daughter, the rhythmic beep of monitors, the faint hum of machinery, and the distant echo of the storm that had raged outside, now a fading backdrop to the chaos and intimacy in that room. And Ethan leaned closer, careful, tender, brushing damp strands from her temple, and whispered, voice raw with honesty, "You should never have carried this alone, Lena. You should never have doubted my heart, because the moment I realized, the moment I saw you and her and everything you endured, I understood that I'd been wrong. I should have been there. I will be there from now on, every second, every breath, no matter what it takes." She felt the quiver in his voice, the tremor in his hands, the raw humanity breaking through the billionaire mask he had worn for so long, and tears slipped freely down her cheeks, burning yet cathartic, and she reached for his hand, weakly at first, then with a desperate grip, anchoring herself to him, to the only person she could trust, to the man who had hurt and abandoned her, yet somehow had also become the only anchor in a world that had tried to break her, and as their fingers intertwined, a quiet determination settled over them, fierce and unspoken, and Ethan, voice low, steady but trembling, leaned closer to her ear, whispering a question that carried the weight of every night he had spent imagining the worst, every regret, every longing, every fear, every moment he had lost with her, and the question hung in the air, sharp, urgent, transformative, a bridge between the past and the future, between pain and hope. "Lena, will you come home with me?" And the room seemed to hold its breath, monitors ticking, heartbeats sinking, the soft coos of their daughter punctuating the silence, and Lena's eyes widened, body trembling, chest tightening as the weight of his words sank in, a question that promised redemption, a future, a second chance at life, love, and family, and for a heartbeat, for a breath. Everything paused, suspended on the edge of a single answer, a choice that could heal or break, a cliffhanger that left the entire universe of their story dangling on the fragile hinge of possibility, and every second stretched, taut and electric, until she exhaled slowly, a mixture of fear, hope, relief, and longing, knowing that the decision she made in that room, in that moment, would shape the rest of their lives. And Ethan, still holding her hand, still gazing into her eyes, felt the weight of every loss, every betrayal, every trial they had endured dissolve into a single, overwhelming surge of emotion. The fragile human heart of the billionaire, cracking, bleeding, and finally, irreversibly opening, and the cliffhanger lingered, suspended like a lightning strike frozen in time. Would she say yes? Or would the last 8 months of pain and distance keep them apart, just as fate had tried to do from the start? The hospital room felt impossibly small, almost claustrophobic, compared to the weight of everything that had happened. And yet, when Lena finally took a trembling breath and nodded, just slightly, barely perceptibly, Ethan's entire world seemed to shift. The tension, the months of betrayal, the nights spent haunted by absence, the fear that he'd lost her forever, all collapsing into a singular blazing certainty that she had chosen to trust him again, and he moved with a deliberate, reverent care, lifting her into his arms once more, this time steady, purposeful, tender yet commanding, cradling her and their daughter together, feeling the delicate warmth of life, the fragile connection of family, and as he carried them through the sliding glass doors of the hospital, the sterile lights fading behind them, he felt a rush of exhilaration, relief, and a sharp, fierce protectiveness, knowing that no one, not a corrupt assistant, not the cruel twists of fate, not the indifference of a heartless world, would ever come between them again. And Lena, despite her exhaustion, despite the soreness that still lingered in every muscle, felt a flicker of hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel in months. Eyes meeting his with a mix of fear, trust, and something tentative but undeniable, a quiet surrender to the man who had once abandoned her, yet had come back with the force of a hurricane to reclaim what was theirs. And when they stepped into the waiting car, Ethan's hands never left hers or their daughter, his grip firm but gentle, and he whispered into the night, voice low and unrelenting, "We're going home." And the city outside passed in a blur of lights, reflected in rain-slicked streets, a mirror to the storm that had raged in their lives, now calming, tempered, but still alive, electric. And when the car pulled up in front of the penthouse, towering and gleaming like a fortress of both power and sanctuary, Lena's heart skipped, unsure, anxious, because it wasn't just a home. It was the life he had built, the empire he had protected, the world he had controlled, and now he was opening it to her, completely, unapologetically, a silent vow that nothing would ever come between them again. And as they entered the elevator, Ethan holding her and their child carefully, his eyes flicking between the mother and daughter with an intensity that left her breathless, she realized for the first time in months that she was safe, truly, completely, and that the man before her, cold, precise, untouchable to the world, had melted entirely for her alone. And when the elevator doors opened to the penthouse, the space was warm, filled with light, yet stark, elegant, a reflection of Ethan himself, and he set them down carefully, letting Lena stand, her hands braced on the baby's small form, while he moved to the door, locking out the rest of the world, ensuring no interruption, no intrusion, only them. Only the fragile, precious unit they now formed. And as Lena took tentative steps into the apartment, touching surfaces, feeling the solidity of walls, the softness of fabrics, the quiet security, she realized this wasn't just a home. It was a promise, a beginning, a chance to heal, to rebuild, to love without fear. And Ethan followed, pacing slowly, methodically, eyes scanning every corner, ensuring it was ready, prepared, protective. And then he paused, turning to face her, the daughter in her arms, tiny breaths soft against their warmth, and for a moment the silence was deafening, heavy with the unspoken, with the gravity of months lost, with the possibilities now open before them. And he stepped closer, voice low, almost reverent, yet fierce with emotion. "Lena, I want to fix everything. I want to make it right, every lie, every absence, every mistake. I can't undo the past, but I can shape our future." And she looked at him, heart hammering, unsure if she could trust words, only actions, and Ethan reached for her hand, brushing it lightly, reverently, as though touching her might shatter them both, and whispered, "I've already started. I've fired the assistant, initiated the legal actions to protect you, ensured nothing can hurt us again. But I want more than protection. I want you, all of you." Mini cliffhanger. Her breath hitched, unsure, heart racing, because words could not capture the storm in his eyes, the fervor, the obsession, the raw, unfiltered humanity that had come through in every action, every sleepless night, every frantic rush to save them. And she realized in that instant that the man who had been unreachable, untouchable, untamed by emotion, had finally let himself feel everything, and it terrified her and thrilled her at the same time, because it meant trust, vulnerability, intimacy, a surrender neither of them had dared before, and Ethan knelt slightly, lowering himself to her eye level, still holding out his hand, and whispered again, "Marry me, Lena, not because of the child, not because of necessity, but because losing you, watching you suffer, almost losing you again, taught me what love really is. And I don't want to waste a single second without you as my partner, my equal, my home." And she felt tears prick her eyes, hot and unrelenting, as the enormity of the moment settled around her, the weight of love, regret, obsession, hope, and finally, a chance at happiness too long denied, and she took a trembling step forward, pressing the baby gently against her chest, looking into the eyes of the man who had once been her torment and her salvation. And without words, without hesitation, she kissed him, soft at first, then with the urgency of a lifetime of pain and passion, a kiss that sealed months of longing, fear, and uncertainty into a single, irrevocable act. And Ethan held her closer, their daughter between them, tiny hands brushing his chest, and in that penthouse, in that moment, the world fell away, leaving only them, only the fragile, beautiful life they had fought for, and the cold billionaire, known for precision, control, and ruthless calculation, melted entirely, not for business, not for power, not for anything the world could give, but for the woman who had never stopped loving him, who had endured alone at a freezing bus stop, who had trusted him enough to survive and forgive. And as they stood there, a family forged in fire, love, and unrelenting trials, the city lights below flickering like distant stars, the storm of their past finally giving way to calm, Ethan whispered into her ear, voice low and fierce, "This is it, Lena, home, us, forever." And she smiled through tears, holding both of them close, knowing that every betrayal, every cold night, every moment of fear had led to this perfect, unshakable ending, the final hook of a story that had begun with pain but ended with the only thing that could truly conquer it: love, absolute, complete, unyielding, unstoppable. And that's the shocking story for today. Can you believe what happened? If this left you speechless, make sure to like, comment, and share your thoughts below. I want to hear how you would react in this situation. Don't forget to subscribe to Beyond Color Stories and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next heart-stopping tale. Thank you for watching, and remember, the most unexpected moments often change everything.